What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Thanks for joining me today. For those of you who joined me yesterday for the wide receiver discussion, I appreciate that. Had a great discussion as to what Green Bay may do with their current wide receiver conundrum, which we may touch base on just a little bit more in just a second. But before we get to our main topic today, we had a couple news and notes from Monday. First of all, Robert Tonyan and Rasul Douglas, they finalize their contracts with Green Bay and are officially back with the Packers. So very much was rumored to be true, although this is the point of year where until everything is signed, sealed, and delivered, there's always the chance that something could happen. Look no further than Zadarius Smith with the Baltimore Ravens. There have been a few of those instances already this offseason. Speaking of Zadarius Smith, he was the other piece of news and notes from Monday. As I mentioned, he is no longer going to be with the Baltimore Ravens. That entire negotiation and contract fell apart in some way, shape, or form. We don't know exactly yet if that was failed physical or something else, but either way, he's not going to be a Raven, so he is going on free agent visits. And of course, it should probably go without saying at this point, his most recent visit was with the Minnesota Vikings, because former Packers are only allowed to either go to the Minnesota Vikings or Chicago Bears. We all know this, but it makes a ton of sense for Z to visit Minnesota for a variety of reasons. Of course, Mike Smith, his former outside linebackers coach who coached him in Green Bay, is in Minnesota, as is Mike Pettin. So there's a lot of familiarity there. Minnesota is going to be transitioning to a 3-4. They have some need certainly at edge rusher. So a lot of tea leaf reading would go into, you don't need much, right? Like, you can clearly put the two together that Zadarius Smith and Minnesota make a lot of sense. Now, it sounds like there's other teams involved as well. Maybe the Chiefs, maybe the Cowboys. There have been a couple other teams mentioned here and there, but Zadarius officially makes his visit to the Minnesota Vikings, and we will have to keep an eye and wait and see if he ultimately ends up wearing purple like every other former Packer in the history of time, basically. All right, let's get to our main event, our main topic for today, and that's Green Bay's biggest areas of need, because, well, number one is fairly obvious. There is a fair amount and a decent amount of needs that need to be addressed this offseason. Brian Gutekunst still has some heavy lifting to do for the remainder of this offseason. So I'm not going to go too in-depth into number one on my list because, as I mentioned, I just did basically like a 45-minute episode on it yesterday. But clearly, wide receiver becomes number 1A on the list of Green Bay's biggest needs. There is 0.0% chance that they are going into the season with their top wide receivers as Randall Cobb, Alan Lazard, Amari Rodgers, Juwan Winfrey, etc., Malik Taylor. Just not happening. They will add receivers, whether that be via trade, free agency, the draft, bringing back MVS, whatever that may ultimately be. We will find out that Green Bay adds to this depth chart in probably fairly significant fashion. Now, does that mean 3 or 4 guys? Probably not. Does that mean a huge contract? Maybe, maybe not. Does that mean a premium first-round pick or 2? Maybe, maybe not. But I guarantee you Green Bay is going to add significant resources to this room in some capacity, and we are just going to have to wait and see. And as I've mentioned, there's 175 days basically until Green Bay plays their first regular season game. There is time to get this figured out. There's still a full draft. There's still a lot of free agents. Green Bay will be able to find receivers that are going to work within this offense, within the flow of the team, within the structure of what Matt LaFleur wants to do. It's just probably going to take a little bit of time. And we'll see sooner rather than later, probably, if MVS comes back with the team, if they sign another free agent, or if they go into the draft with significant needs at the position. All of those are within the realm of possibility, but clearly and obviously, wide receiver is 1A. One last shameless plug. If you haven't yet, go back and listen to yesterday's episode where I go into very deep detail as to what Green Bay could potentially do at that position. Number 2 on my list, and I'm cheating a little bit here. I'm going to combine some of these sort of together in a couple different situations here. But number 2 is sort of encompassed with pass rush, defensive line, and edge rusher. And I know defensive line, edge rusher, 2 totally different positions, but I want to sort of combine them at the hip because I do feel like pass rusher is maybe a bigger need than people are thinking / expecting at this point. And I also think that that could come on the interior of the defensive line, or that could come at the edge rusher position. So that's why I'm sort of coupling those two together. Now, just pass rush is not the only thing that those 2 positions need. But let's start with pass rush. Let's be clear, first of all. Preston Smith, Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry, and Rashawn Gary as a front four is potent, right? That's not a bad front four to start with from a pass rush standpoint. Now, Dean Lowry is going to ebb and flow. There's going to be games where he looks more physical and dominant. There's going to be other games where he looks fairly nondescript, not there, or worse. So you have to take the good with the bad sometimes with Dean Lowry. Although towards the second half of last year, I thought he played really, really nice football and was really becoming more of an impact player for Green Bay. Kenny Clark, very good player, no disputing that. One of the top defensive tackles in football. But his pass rush a lot of times is more of a slow burn. It's going to be more collapsing the pocket, allowing his edge rushers to get home, more than it's going to be Aaron Donald-esque where he beats somebody with an arm over and explodes to the quarterback, right? That's not a bad thing. Having, the ability to collapse a pocket, reset the line of scrimmage, and use your strength and physicality is certainly a good thing, but it's not that quick, again, immediate beat a guard or a center, get to the quarterback and have that quick immediate pressure. It's a little bit more of a slow burn. Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, two very good pass rushers. Rashawn's coming into his own, and we'll see what that ceiling actually is for Gary. Preston Smith's coming off a very nice season a year ago. However, then after those four, it becomes very barren. You're talking about Tipa Naliai or Jonathan Garvin or, TJ Slayton. Like, you just get very thin very fast at pass rusher if any of those guys go out. So I think that is a much bigger need than people will, or maybe than we've been led to believe at this point. Speaking of those two positions, defensive line and edge rusher, both of them in general need more depth as well. And we've been talking about getting Kenny Clark help on the interior for forever. Clark, Lowry, Slayton, listen, if they go into the year with those three as their top three defensive linemen, that's okay. Slayton to me is more than capable of taking a step this upcoming season. If Lowry can play like he did last year and Kenny Clark can just be Kenny Clark, you are good. But after that, it's Jack Heflin and nothing. And Jack Heflin to me is a 6th or 7th defensive lineman on your team at best, probably best suited for a practice squad role. No offense to Jack, and I hope he proves me wrong and shuts me up. And I certainly don't want to meet him on the practice field and have him be like, hey, remember when you said I'm just a practice squad guy? So Jack, if you're listening, I apologize in advance. But in an ideal situation, him going into year 2, he's more in the back of your rotation or still developing on the practice squad. Still think there's upside there, but still work to do. So you've got maybe 3 positions, including potentially a starter. Like, you'd love to have maybe Slayton be more of a guy coming off the bench, right? And not having to be counted on as your third guy in a 3-4, despite how little they actually play 3-4. But you ultimately need more depth here. And again, you still shudder to think if Kenny Clark would go out to any period for any extended period of time, can they get by in the interior, stopping the run with Slayton, Heflin, Dean Lowry, etc. Clearly, some draft picks and, maybe a veteran free agent signing, maybe a Tyler Lancaster could be at play here. Edge rusher, same thing, right? You've got Preston Smith and then Rashawn Gary, and then not much of anything. You do have Tipa Naliai, Jonathan Garvin, Ladarius Hamilton, Randy Ramsey, but none of those guys are guys you want playing major, significant playing time. And you also get to the point where, again, if Rashawn Gary or Preston Smith are out for any extended period of time, any of those guys I just mentioned, one of them is going to have to probably step up and play 40, 50 snaps a game. That's far from ideal. So from a pass rush standpoint, again, they could go interior, exterior, edge rusher, interior defender, doesn't really matter, but they would ideally add more to that room from a pure pressure standpoint. Edge rusher, they could bring back a Whitney Merciless. They could clearly take a player early in the draft with the edge rusher class is well within the realm of possibility. Interior defensive line, not from a pass rush standpoint, but Tyler Lancaster could be somebody that helps out that rotation. Maybe if Merciless doesn't work out, or even if he does, you could wait till the market settles a bit and look at veteran edge rushers like a Jerry Hughes, Melvin Ingram, Jamie Collins, Justin Houston, Pernell McPhee. Maybe one of those guys that are just ring chasing and comes in close to a veteran minimum. That's within the realm of possibility. But clearly and ideally, you would get better depth on the edges and then better depth on the interior, including some guys who can rush the passer. I go back to last year when Zadarius Smith was out. Preston and Rashawn were your 2 guys. What was happening a lot of times is those 2 guys would go out at the same time. All of a sudden, it's Garvin and Tipa in the game. And just your overall structure of your defense changes entirely. Your edge setting's not as good. Your pass rush isn't as good. Like there was a night and day difference between starters on the edge and then getting Garvin and Tipa in. Like it was the degradation was huge. Like they need better depth there. They don't have it right now, and that's something that they're going to have to work on. Again, Whitney Merciless was a phenomenal signing. We'll see if they try to bring him back or if they go in a different direction. Number 3 on my list is just offensive line in general. Now, Green Bay is potentially in a nice spot where if they don't add anyone, if they don't add a single player, which clearly is not going to happen, but they can probably go into the season, assuming David Bakhtiari is healthy, which I would love to assume, but they can probably go into the season, David Bakhtiari, John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers, Royce Newman, and Yash Nyman, and feel pretty darn good. Those are guys who have a lot of snaps under their belt already. Even Myers and Newman, who were rookies last year. Even Yash, who played his first snaps basically last year. Like you can go into the season and feel like, okay, we can get through a good chunk of that with those 5 until Elgton Jenkins comes back. I think that's fair. Now, that being said, your right side of your line of Yash Nyman playing a new position at right tackle and Royce Newman playing right guard is far from ideal. There are significant potential issues there. And I know everyone really likes what Yash provided a season ago. And there is a real chance that he can develop into a pure starting tackle. But he was not there a season ago. Rodgers and this offense and some of the help that was provided to Yash really covered for some of the deficiencies. And now you're taking that, making him switch sides, which he has not really done. He's played almost entirely on the left side, even in practice and those sort of things, making him switch sides. And again, putting him next to a right guard who was very up and down a season ago in Royce Newman. Now, could both of them take a step and really become true starters? Clearly within the realm of possibility. And with Adam Stenavich still in-house, I trust his ability to put together a solid offensive line, almost regardless of who's out there. But even if that's the case, even if Newman and Yash you're feeling comfortable with on the right side of the line, depth is a major issue. You don't know when Elton's going to come back. You've got Jake Hansen and you've got Cole Van Lanen, and then basically nothing. So if everyone's healthy and Elgton Jenkins comes back, like to me, if you go into the playoffs with Bakhtiari, John Runyon Jr., Myers, Newman, and Elgton Jenkins at right tackle, I feel pretty darn good about that offensive line. But let's just start with the tackles, right? David Bakhtiari and potentially Elgton Jenkins if he ends up there. Like there's no guarantee. Like there's a lot of risk going into the season with Bakhtiari, who hasn't played in well over a year at that point. And there were serious questions as to like what's going on with his knee. Now they seem to feel confident about it, but if all of a sudden something goes wrong again and you end up without David Bakhtiari, now what are you doing? Yash at left tackle, I don't know, Royce Newman at right tackle, and Jake Hansen at right guard until Elgton comes back? Like that becomes a major issue very fast. And what if Elgton Jenkins has issues similar to a David Bakhtiari, where he has a setback, or maybe he can't play till far into the season, or again, heaven forbid, something happens similar to a David Bakhtiari? That makes your entire depth take a hit. Now, I think Jake Hansen could potentially be a Lucas Patrick-esque swing guy, fill in at center guard for a game or two here or there, and probably be just fine. But you probably really want to get some sort of just overall depth and potentially an offensive tackle that you feel you can trust. And to Brian Gutekunst's defense, he's done a great job with this. From Jared Valdir to Rick Wagner to Dennis Kelly, in back-to-back-to-back seasons, he has addressed that position with a veteran at tackle who can really play left tackle, right tackle, and do a variety of things and come in and solidify the offensive line. But guess what? They've basically needed those guys almost every single year. Rick Wagner massively in 2020, and then Dennis Kelly towards the end of last year. So to me, getting another veteran offensive tackle who could swing and play left or right, even if you feel comfortable with Yash starting at right tackle, seems very important to me. Dennis Kelly, Brian Bulaga, Riley Reif, Jermaine Ifedi, Oday Abushi. Both Ifedi and Abushi could play guard or tackle in a pinch as well. Those are all guys that could make some sense. Of course, they could go draft again and maybe feel, if they go early, that they have somebody who could step in and play. But offensive line to me is still, especially the depth, is still a major need for this team. Number 4, I would love to say that this specific grouping wasn't as big of a deal and would love to put and prioritize other positions, but clearly special teams is a major issue and something that this team still has to address. Now, Mason Crosby, Pat O'Donnell seem to be the potential kicker and punter unless Molson just completely outkicks Crosby in camp, and then it's probably still Molson's job, right? So they probably don't have to address kicker. Maybe they take a late round flyer on a punter and have him compete with O'Donnell, but they clearly brought O'Donnell in to be the guy this upcoming season. But long snapper, kick returner, punt returner, and literally pretty much every other spot from field goal blocking to, gunner to all of it. All of it needs a complete makeover, and they need to address those positions in a variety of different ways. Green Bay has really done nothing outside of Pat O'Donnell to address the special teams from a personnel standpoint so far this season. They've done a lot from a coaching standpoint, but this is still a clear need for the Packers moving forward. Number 5 is defensive back in general, all right? So Green Bay is in a great spot from a starting standpoint. Douglas, Stokes, Jair, Savage, Amos, you're good. Like, your main 5 guys for the majority of the season are out there, and you feel really good about that. Now, Savage struggled at times a season ago. It's not just this perfect situation that I think maybe a lot of people think it is, that you can just put him out there and trust everything's going to be great. There were issues with Savage a season ago that he needs to clean up this season. And you also, as I've mentioned a couple days back, like, you don't have a perfect slot corner to play on early downs. To me, that's not Douglas, that's not Savage, that's not Jair, that's not Stokes. To me, Stokes and Jair are your outside corners on early downs, and then you want somebody who can be a little bit more physical inside, but also have the twitchiness and agility to cover those slot receivers. I don't feel like they have that guy perfectly. I don't think it's anyone on this team. So whether they bring back a Chandon Sullivan, maybe they believe Shamar Jean-Charles can potentially fill that role eventually. I don't see that either, but either way, they have a potential need there. Now, on clear passing downs, yes, Douglas and Stokes on the outside with Jair in the slot, perfect. You're good to go, but I don't think you want to subject Jair Alexander's shoulder and just his overall body and well-being at a little, we're at one, but a little under 5'10"-ish, to a bunch of wear and tear at that position, especially as you give him the highest paid contract at corner probably this offseason at some point. That's just not in his best interest, either in the short term or the long term. You want somebody a bit more physical. Bringing back a Chandon Sullivan could make a lot of sense. Maybe a Justin Coleman. We'll see. They could draft somebody as well. But they probably want to address that slot position a little bit more. And then regardless, right? You have 3 guys, and then it's a bunch of question marks. Shamar Jean-Charles, Cabianento, you just don't have a 4th or 5th corner at this point. Those guys can compete probably more for your 6th corner, but you would ideally like to get a bit more depth there. Meanwhile, at safety, you've got Amos and Savage, but Henry Black is gone. Vernon Scott didn't play at all a season ago. You've got Sean Davis and Innis Gaines, but you're not really trusting that. And clearly, the third safety is something that they have prioritized. Henry Black played a decent amount of snaps a season ago. That's a position that sees the field with some regularity. So if you could get somebody in there who could fill that safety role, I personally would take a look at Deshaun Elliott. Still young. I think he has some talent. Could be a potential third safety. But also, going along with this, if Amos or Savage get hurt, you don't have that depth at that safety position either. So that continues to be a need, both slot corner, safety, and just depth at really all of the defensive back positions is going to be something that Gutekunst has to address in some capacity. And then last but not least, number 6 is inside linebacker depth. Again, starting caliber players, Devondre Campbell, Chris Barnes, you feel really good about that group. But then next up behind that, Ty Summers, Isaiah McDuffie, Ray Wilborn, I don't think you want any of those guys playing significant snaps. And I'm not sure you feel great about any of them just in general, right? Whether it be special teams, whether it be your 4th or 5th linebacker. I think you want to bring in some competition. Maybe it's early in the draft. Maybe it's late in the draft. Maybe it's another undrafted free agent find like Chris Barnes. Maybe it's a veteran. Who knows? But they really need to find a little bit more depth at that inside linebacker spot. Oren Burks is gone. Not sure that really changes much, but still need to find another linebacker to add some depth to that overall unit. I would love to see a Jabril Peppers, who has played safety for the Giants, former first-round pick. I think maybe he could be used some in that third safety role, but maybe even more importantly, as a nickel or dime linebacker. And now I know Devondre Campbell's not coming off the field, but give me Campbell and Jabril Peppers, at that linebacker spot. Jair in the slot, Rasul Douglas and Eric Stokes on the outside, Savage and Amos at safety. Really like the sound of that as a potential nickel defense on clear and obvious passing downs. Preston and Rashawn Gary outside, Clark and Lowry inside. Now we're cooking with gas a little bit. Really like the makings of that defense, what they can do from a pass rush, coverage, just all of it, right? So we'd love to see something like that. Is it probably going to be Jabril Peppers? No, but somebody in that ilk, in that mold, could really fit well as a nickel linebacker / safety. And again, somebody who may be able to fill in a little bit in that third safety role as well. That is going to do it for me today. Those are my 6 biggest needs for the Green Bay Packers as we continue this crazy offseason. Appreciate you joining me. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.